Tom Bailey, on July 22nd of 1978, you were 35 years old and you were a guard at the Pontiac Prison on the day of those infamous Pontiac Prison riots. I can't wait to dive into your story, your recollection, your retelling of that whole day, because oh my goodness, what a crazy day it was. But first of all, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate your time.
You're welcome. Where you want me to start?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself. For people that don't know who you are, aside from what I just told them, that you were a guard at the Pontiac Prison on the day of the Pontiac Prison riots.
I finished, I went to high school in Fayetteville, North Carolina. I joined the Navy from Fayetteville, North Carolina. I was stationed on a tugboat for 18 months in Argentia, Newfoundland. Then I was stationed on the USS DuPont, which is a destroyer out of Norfolk, Virginia, for the rest of my Navy tour. I got out of the Navy, met my wife. We got married in 1965. We had 3 children, David, Dan, and Delma. I started at the prison in 1977.
Ooh, 1 year you had
year.
under your belt before
Yes.
that day.
1 year. At the day of the riot, I was stationed in the dining room tower. I knew something was up because the West House was in the dining room and no one was eating. And finally, the lieutenant in the dining room said, well, if they're not going to eat, we'll send them back to the West House. And when he sent them back to the West House, then they let the North Yard off the yard to go back to their house. And that's when they hit the guard in the head with a baseball bat on the door and took over the North House.
Holy smokes. Well, let's take a couple steps back here before we dive right into it. It's very exciting stuff. Maybe exciting is the wrong word here. But first of all, I mean, we talked over coffee a few days ago, and you said maybe let's not illustrate the layout of the prison because it's very similar today to what it was then, and it's not always a good idea to publicize, hey, here's your way around the prison yard.
Right.
But
right.
It's important to note that, first of all, there's an entrance, and there are 3 different houses that house all the inmates: the West, the North, and the East House, or West House, I'm sorry.
North,
West.
South, West.
That's what I meant. There we go.
North, South, West. Now, today, the West is cut into half, so it's West and East. But at the time of the riot, there was only one West House. It was the complete house. They were in the dining room.
And the dining room is its own separate building here.
It's connected to the North and South House across the compound. So they have to cross the compound to get to the dining room. They were in the dining room.
Okay, got it. And, I'm not going to, go too deep into it here or anything like that. No one can see this, but I do have like a little sketch that I made of the layout. And just to give people a sketchy, a rough understanding of the layout of this place, you enter the prison yard through the administration building, and right in front of you, there's a chapel. To the left, there's the North House. To the right, there's the West House. And in the far back left, there's the South House. And in between that far left South House and the close up to the left North House, there's a dining room. And they all kind of connect there. Out elsewhere is this prison yard. And I think that rough drawing of it will give people all they need to know, really, for the events that follow that you're about to tell us about. But before we... go ahead.
Actually, at the time, they had the chapel, which was in front of the North House.
Okay, right. And that's a totally separate building then?
Yes.
Got it. And when we're talking about these riots, these must have been premeditated. It must have been planned, correct? Were all the inmates, for the most part, aware of what the plan was on this particular day? It wasn't just spur of the moment?
I couldn't prove that, but I suspect it. The reason I suspect it is because the West House didn't eat, for one thing. And it was so coordinated when the North came in that they started it all off. Well, if the West House knew about it and they're across the compound and the North did it, they had to have some kind of communications between themselves. I think they all knew that it was going to happen.
So go ahead and tell us, when did this all start? How was the day beginning? What were the first things that happened that led to this overall outbreak, riot? I shouldn't call it an outbreak, but the riot. Walk me through the day.
Well, the first thing was around 8:30, 9 o'clock. We were feeding the West House. They were in the dining room. I was in the dining room tower. The dining room tower is on the east side of the building where the tower officer was. The West House was in. They didn't eat. So they were sent back to the West House. Then the North House, who was on the yard at the time, was sent back to their house. And when the North House got to their house, I assumed they were the ones that was going to kick it off. So they hit the officer on the door with a baseball bat, and he had heavy, thick glasses. So they knocked his glasses off. He couldn't identify anybody. He told me this later. Incidentally, a lot of this stuff I didn't know till the next day. But he got hit in the face. They took over the North House. They took the keys. And at the same time, the South House was in the chapel watching a movie. So they broke out of the South House, or the dining room, to go back to...
Sorry, they broke out of the chapel, you mean?
Right.
Okay.
They broke out of the chapel to go back to their house because they knew the North House. They'd heard on the radio that it was going down. So they broke out of the chapel to go back to the South House. Well, the lieutenant in the chapel called the South House and said, "They're breaking out. Don't let them in the house." So he saved all the guards in the South House because they locked the door and wouldn't let the inmates in. So the inmates were stuck outside the house where all the guards were.
Okay, so this must have been sometime around lunch or something. Because
it was before lunch. It all happened almost simultaneously.
Okay, got it. And so the people at the North House, they were out in the yard for what I assume would be, your recreational time.
Right.
And how many inmates do you think were out on the yard at one time, and how many guards were there that were responsible for keeping them under control?
On the yard, there was approximately 500. The whole house was out. 500
inmates?
Yeah, and there was probably 4 or 5 guards.
Well, I'm not a mathematician, but that ratio seems pretty favorable for the inmates. My goodness. And so where'd they get the baseball bat? Apparently that's a thing that they're allowed to have?
It was on the yard, yeah. They were allowed to play baseball. They're allowed to lift weights. They had basketballs. They had all kinds of sports equipment on the yard.
And what were these inmates, for the most part, in there for? Was this like, it wasn't a maximum security prison. What kind of crimes?
It was.
Oh, it was. This was maximum security.
It was maximum security. We had murderers. We had rapists. We had everything out there.
Okay, so this is like these are the bad guys.
They're the bad guys, yeah.
And were any in there for life? I apologize,
Yes.
I don't understand the system very well, but...
Yes, they were. At the time, we didn't have death row there, but we did have life without parole. We had everything from drunk driving to multiple murders, rapes, killers. We had the I-57 murderer in there. We had a lot of people, a lot of bad people.
Were child molesters in there?
Oh, yeah.
Were they in the yard? I think I've heard that they sometimes get sectioned off into their own...
Most of them have to end up in PCU because
What's
there's
PCU?
a code,
I'm sorry.
Protective custody in it, because the code of the inmates, the lowest of the low, is a child molester, and if they can, even the murderer is a better guy than a child molester. So if the inmates find out that there's a child molester there, they will try to kill him. They will try to kill him.
Wow.
There's just nothing lower than a child molester in the code of the inmates. So they usually have to go to PC for protection from these other guys.
Wow. That's really interesting. That's still a thing that happens today.
It is. There's still a PCU.
Good heavens. Okay,
protective custody in it.
so these guys were out on the yard. I'm going to say guys because the vast majority, I'm sure, were men because
They're
that's,
all men.
you know, okay, they're all men. So I guess there's really not many co-ed jails for
And
obvious reasons.
There was a couple that think they was women, but there were men.
Okay. Well, so these individuals were all out on the yard, and
Right.
it was rec time.
Right.
And all of a sudden, one guy just has a bat, takes out a guard, and it's go time, right?
Yes.
That's the green light, and the word gets around relatively quickly.
Right, because the lieutenants have the radio, and they ask for guards' help, and it comes over the radio. The other inmates hear it too, and they said, "Well, let's go. You know, it's go time." Mm-hmm. The thing that held them up, and I think it's very important to understand that they had it organized where the West House would be in the dining room, the North House would be on the yard, and the West House would be in the
Right.
No, the South House would be in the chapel. West is in the dining room, South in the chapel, North in the yard. So the whole prison's let loose. The whole prison is out of their cells. Well, because the West House, they usually hold the West House in the dining room and let the South House or North House come back from yard. Well, that way, the West House would have been out. The North House was going to take over the North House, and the South House was in the chapel. So the West House would have taken over the dining room. The South House come out of the chapel to take over the South House, and the North House was already jumping off. But this day, since they didn't eat, the lieutenant in the dining room says, well, if they're not going to eat, let's send them back before we bring the North House in. So the West House was getting locked up before the North House came off the yard. So that saved the West House and probably saved the dining room where I was at.
Just because they weren't eating for
Just
whatever
because.
reason, they kind of ruined the plan.
Right, exactly right.
Why weren't they eating? Did that normally happen?
They knew something was going to happen.
So their appetite might have just kind of been gone.
And they were all looking towards the door, waiting for the signal that the North House had gone down, in my opinion.
Now, looking back, do you think that they really were doing that?
Yes.
You remember, like, hey, why are these guys being so weird today?
Right. Yes, they were really doing that because they kept looking towards the front door, listening, and because the North House had to go right past that front door of the dining room to go back to the cell house.
And they luckily never saw their cue because they weren't eating and they got sent back.
They got sent back, and we almost had them locked up before the North House came in.
Wow. Okay, so what's the North House start doing? They get the ball rolling. They successfully take out one guard. If there was just a couple guards, I assume that they had no problem taking out the other one. What happened to those guards, and what did those prisoners of the North House end up doing?
I really don't know the sequence because I wasn't there, but when they got the cell house door open, of course they rushed the cell house and everybody in it. Well, there was only about 5 guards in there, but they knocked him down. He fell down and lost his glasses, and one of the inmates saved his life by saying he's dead and threw a sheet over him. So he laid there and played dead the whole time this was going on. Well, in the meantime, they took their belts and locked the front door and wrapped their belts around it and tied it off so the guards couldn't get back in the house. The guards that were in the house had no idea what was happening on the ground floor. Then they started going around the galleries and got the first guard they got his keys, so they started open gallery doors, and they went up, it was up on 8 gallery. They attacked a guard up there, and then the guard off the back brakes, he come up to help, and they killed him. And then the other guard that was working the galleries, he ran away from him when he seen it was going on. He ran down to the PC unit, which was in 2 and 4 gallery.
Oh,
and
I'm sorry. What are these galleries, just for the sake of understanding this?
Well, there's tiers, different tiers in the cell house. There's like 4 tiers on each side of the house.
Are these like stories, you mean? Like levels?
They're levels, yeah,
Okay.
with cells. And there's usually supposed to be a guard on every one of those, but there never is. There never was. So anyway, he came running down the stairs while they were stabbing him. He ran down the stairs and he went to the PC door and started pushing his keys under the door so that they couldn't get his keys. And he died right there at that door. The lieutenant that was in the cage had gotten a promotion. That's a sergeant's job. The lieutenant got a promotion just the week before, and he was supposed to be working in the hospital, but the cell house sergeant didn't show up, and the lieutenant knew that assignment, so they put him in there. Well, the inmate that was in the cage working with him pushed him against the cage bars so that the inmates outside could stab him, and they killed him.
They killed him up against the cage.
Right.
And meanwhile, while they're stabbing him, he's sliding the keys under the cage door to the cage itself into the PCU, which is a personal protective care unit where these child molesters, I believe, would stay.
And homosexuals and those that couldn't make it in population. Maybe the ones that told on somebody else, they're there too.
Okay.
So,
and in there, who's he passing the keys to? I assume those inmates that you said would have gotten killed, the homosexuals you said, and the whatever. They weren't in. They're probably in their own cells there, but there were officers in that room, I would assume, right?
There was 2 officers in there. There was a female that had only worked there a few months. She was like 18 years old. She was gorgeous. And she tried to get the door open to let this guard that was being stabbed through. And she didn't have the key to that door, but she was trying to use it anyway. If she'd have opened that door, they would have took PC too. They would have taken them 2 galleries also. But she didn't cut the door open, so they couldn't get to her. They probably would have raped her to death. Because she was gorgeous. She never came back. She was done the day of the riot.
And I guess if she was right next to that cage, she watched that guy get stabbed to death right in front of her.
Yes, she did.
Wow. And she tried to open the door, but just couldn't.
Right. She didn't have the key. The officers, there was a special key for PC for the in gates that come onto the gallery. The officers had changed that lock so that they could use the padlocks for the other galleries on that lock too. And the inmates didn't know it, and they knew there was a different lock on there. They never tried their key, or they would have gotten it open. But the key she had, which was for the lock that was supposed to be there, wouldn't work because the officers had changed that key. Saved her life.
A lot of interesting things that were out of the ordinary happened that day that prevented this from being even worse than it was, I feel like.
Absolutely.
Very interesting. And I can't wait to ask you some more questions. But first, here's a quick word from one of our beloved sponsors. It's Dave's Supermarket. We all know Dave's, I'm sure. I'm sure you've been there plenty of times, Tom.
Oh, yeah.
Dave's Supermarket is wonderful. This is Central Illinois' favorite place in... Well, let me actually go ahead and get this up on the screen. But yeah, okay, first of all, you ever been to Dave's? You have a grandson that works there, right?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, Jacob.
Jacob May, yes.
What a wonderful guy that is. But okay, one moment here. I apologize.
Really proud of him.
He's a great guy. My goodness.
He says the same about you.
No, come on.
Since 1950, Dave's Supermarket in Fairbury has been wowing customers throughout Central Illinois with their unmatched customer service, delectable deli market, beloved grocery carryout service, and many other fortes, which is why they've earned hundreds of 5-star reviews online. Dave's 3rd Street Deli has plenty of seating and is a destination place to meet your family and friends for good food, fun, and fellowship. Not only is their home-style fried chicken here the best around, but you can also enjoy free coffee and 50-cent ice cream every single day. And be sure to check out their Old World Bakery while you're here, where freshly baked goods are prepared every morning. You'll find hundreds of unique and signature items here at Dave's that you won't find anywhere else, like their famous potato salad, ham loaf, and canned meats, just to name a few. Dave's Supermarket is open Monday through Saturday from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. and offers online shopping and curbside services. Come experience this revered location that puts the super in supermarket when you shop at Dave's in Fairbury, Illinois, wowing the customer for over 70 years.
Hey, well, that was Dave's Supermarket in Fairbury, Illinois. Great place, Dave's Supermarket. But hey, let's continue the story then. So they take over the North House. Mm-hmm. Are they successful, and what exactly are they trying to do in the North House then?
At the time, I think they wanted to kill guards.
Okay.
I think the gangs were kind of conflicting with each other, and I think they drew a pack to get the guards. I really believe that. They killed 3 people in that cell house, and they wounded 2. That one, he bled out on the gallery. He completely bled out, and they took him to the hospital, and he made it. One of the tax squad members took his he had a sucking chest wound, and one of the tax squad guards took a cigarette wrapper and stuck it in the hole in his chest, and they say that saved his life because of that sucking wound. He was completely out of blood when he got to the hospital, but they did save him. The other one was at the door, and he was playing dead, the one that got hit. And he got stabbed too, but he had gotten hit in the head, and they just called him dead and threw a sheet over him and left him there alone.
What a story. What an experience that guy must have had.
Oh, boy.
Is he still around?
Yeah, I think he is. I'm not for sure if he's still alive or not.
Mm-hmm. Man, so he plays dead. That saves him. Meanwhile, 2 of his fellow guards get killed in the North House, and they're closing the doors behind them and belting, taking their belts and locking shut those doors so guards can't come in. But
right.
what's their ultimate goal, do you think? Because they're locking themselves in this place. They've killed some guards, but they're not trying to escape, it doesn't seem.
They really didn't have any demands. They were just going wild. They were just going wild. But the scenario of what they had planned by the way, the chapel broke out when they heard the noise. The lieutenant in the chapel called the South House, told him don't open the door, so he kept them guards safe. Well, they came in under my tower. They were standing under my tower for almost the whole day, along with Sharon Patchett, which was in the alleyway behind the dining room, and they were going to rape her, but something happened, and they went towards the commissary instead. So she was under my tower. She had a big cut in her head, and they had taken her shirt off, and an inmate gave her a shirt of his to put on. An inmate incidentally took her back to the South House. So they brought her into the tower, too.
For the sake of everyone being able to follow along with what's going on and where it's happening, you said you were a guard in a tower. And now kind of illustrate to us what this tower looks like, where it's at, because you're in the dining hall, and there's
right.
a tower in the dining hall maybe, and what are you doing in that tower?
They call it a tower. It's really not. It's just a little above the heads of the inmates, where I can look out over the people dining room, and it's a cage that I'm in. It's covered with plexiglass so that they couldn't throw gasoline or any liquid in on me, but it did have ports for the guns. It's all the way on the west side of the dining room where I could see everybody that was in the dining room. We were in there. We had a gas gun, and we had a .22 rifle. That's all we had.
Okay.
I had all the guards under the tower, as I told you before. They expected me to keep the guards off, or keep the inmates off of them. Now when I say the inmates were in the North House. Well, I'd just come out of that North House 2 weeks before that. And I knew that the lieutenant in there had the key to the dining room. where he could open the door and let the inmates come in to eat.
Because they're connected, the dining room and the north house and the south house. And
are
they're
connected.
Right, just a little wall is in between them, a little door or something.
Right. It's a big
glass.
door, but yeah, there's a door.
Right.
And it has a single glass pane in it that's probably 6 inches square.
So you can look through.
Yeah.
But you can't get through without a key.
Right. And the dining room guard kept looking in there, and he said there's officers down, but he couldn't tell who it was. And I knew if the guard was down, that he had the dining room key. So I told the guy in the tower that was with me, I pulled my stool over to one of the ports, and I told him, I says, I'll shoot this round of gas if they come through that door, but I'm going to start shooting into them with that 22 because I want them to feel like it's not safe in here and get back out, because I had the whole south house under my tower, expecting me to keep the inmates off of them. And all I had was a 22.
Okay, so you had the whole south house guards, all those guards, right there underneath your tower, and you're their protector in that moment, right?
Right. I'm the only thing that's between them and the inmates and that locked door.
Goodness. And so this is all this commotion, this murder, this chaos is going on right on the other side of that door that's right in that dining room that you're in control of. And luckily all the inmates at this point, they're gone, right? They're back in their
cell house.
Yeah, the West House, because they weren't eating.
Right.
And so it was just you and these guards, correct? And you're just looking at that door.
And the inmate crew that's in there. There was inmate workers.
Okay.
That serve tables and work in the kitchen. They were there.
And so you're all looking at this door, I'm sure, just hoping that nothing comes through, hoping that they don't get the guard with the key and, kill him and take his key and get in there.
Right.
Because that's going to be trouble for you. And you're prepared to just, fire some rounds into them to show them that, hey, it's not safe. But can you hear the commotion since it's right there?
I could not hear much. I couldn't hear much, but this guard that was working the dining room kept telling me what he could see through the door. And I pretty much knew what was going on over there. And of course, I had Sharon Patch, the guard that was almost raped. She was under my tower. I fed her cold compresses from the water coolers for her head. She took, incidentally, after the fact, she took 90 stitches in her head. And that was keeping me going. There's another door to the outside where the West House comes in. And I could hear the inmates out there telling the guards, or the inmates that was in the dining room, to take over the dining room. And they all come over and sat at 2 or 3 tables right around my tower and sat very quietly there. They wouldn't mess around. But the inmates outside wanted them to take over the dining room so that they could get to the knives and stuff that was in the kitchen. But they didn't. They wouldn't do it. They stayed really quiet by themselves in these 2 or 3 tables that they were around.
Wow. Man. And what would have happened if they didn't stay quiet? If they did, kind of get up, would you have had to open?
I would have probably tried to gas them.
What's the gas? You said there's
it's a gas gun, and it shoots CS gas, which you can't hardly breathe in. It's like tear gas, only worse.
And it just, shoots a canister at them?
Yeah.
And then, okay. Got it.
Yeah.
Wow. So this is all going on right next door to you, literally right on the other side of this door, because the North House and the dining hall are connected.
Right.
What goes on? I mean, how does this go down? Does it get worse before it gets better?
I think it does. There was one tower in the middle of the compound that he fired gas when there was a report that they took a fork truck out of the mechanical store and was trying to break in the commissary with a fork truck. And he was shooting gas that was bouncing off the industrial building and going down in the alley between the captain's office and the industrial building. And that gas was kind of drifting in towards me. I could smell it, but it wasn't bad enough where I couldn't breathe. But it was drifting in there. Well, it was about, I'm guessing around that time is when they brought the fire truck in to put the general store was on fire. They were burning that down. That's where all their food was. And they were burning that, and a fire truck came in, and it had some state policemen on the fire truck with shotguns. And that kind of backed them up away from them. But what went on out there on the yard, I have no idea because I wasn't there. I couldn't see it there.
Now, I've heard that some people in Pontiac during this time, because this is not in the middle of town, but there are plenty of houses surrounding this prison. And a lot of them have even said that they pulled out lawn chairs and they went on their front lawn, and they said it looked like every cop in the country was there at the Pontiac prison that day. How many cop cars do you think were there? How many officers showed up, and what were they even gonna do? What did they do?
Okay, what happened? While I was in that tower, I had windows looking out on Division Street, which is where the police cars were coming. The Division Street was probably 3 blocks long in front of the prison, or by the side of the prison. Well, the cars were on both sides of the road. The whole length of the prison property was 3 or 4 blocks long. They were on both sides of the road, just bumper to bumper. And then there was more policemen coming, and they let them park out at the armory, which is about 4 blocks away, and they shuttled them over there. Well, the police came into the compound with shotguns. Our tax squad actually went into the north house. They cut the belts, went into the north house. They found what was the chaos there because they had weapons and batons and everything. The inmates locked up. They just jumped in a cell and closed the door. Well, they took over the north house. They got the wounded and the other guys out of there and sent them to the hospital. Then they came in the dining room where I was at and took Sharon Patchett out. They're the ones that really seen the bad stuff. But the state police, they lined the sidewalks as they were bringing, after the riot was over, after they settled them all down, they were sitting on a lawn, just sitting quietly, and they said non-participants sit down. And they did. We had guards on top of the administration building with shotguns, and we had people around watching them.
The inmates all sat down.
Yeah, the ones that were non-participants.
Right.
All right, they sat down. The ones that were in the cell house, they locked up. I mean, they went into anybody's cell and closed the door. The ones that were on the front lawn were actually the moviegoers. It was all that was out there, the South House.
Because they broke out in hopes to join in on the fun, and in that they locked their cell house doors. And
right.
And so they were just out in the open.
So you had just the South House and the North House that was still out there on the lawn. That's who was out there. The West House was locked up again. So they took them, they stripped them down naked, and took them back into the cell house, 10 at a time. The state police stood by the sidewalks as they marched them in. The tax squad actually put them away. They had the tax squad from several prisons that came in to help. And the guards actually put them back in the cell house 10 at a time, naked.
Man.
We made them strip completely down to their toenails.
So if you were on the right, I guess if you had a home in a certain area and you could see the yard and you were outside and you looked over at the prison yard, you would have seen at this time hundreds of naked guys just marching?
No, you couldn't see them. They were in front of the North and South House. And there's a wall there where they can't see from the Sally Port in. The front of the prison is got gates, but there's buildings there too that block off the inside of the prison where you couldn't see in.
I see. Okay, that makes sense. What? And that wall is just there so they don't get any ideas or they can't see any,
Now the walls is to keep them in.
To keep them in, yeah. But I mean, isn't it like a brick wall and then it's like a fence or something?
In places. In places, there's a wall, and other places, there's fences. Well, outside the cell house, it's fences on the outside where the road is. But on the Sallyport side, it was brick wall, and on the west side, it was a brick wall.
Okay. So all the insanity happens in the North House. That's where the death happens.
Yes.
The South House tried to get out of the chapel, and they tried to get to the South House, but they couldn't. And the West House, they were already locked away because they didn't eat at breakfast. And they get into the North House, apparently, and they open up the doors, and you might have already touched on this, but they rip the belts, I assume. They're in there. They put everyone in their cells, definitely not their correct cells. They just throw them in anywhere and close the door. And when officially do they declare this riot over?
Newsflash, no one likes being injured or being in pain. And if you're suffering from joint or muscle pain or recovering from a sports injury or a recent surgery, Ultra Physical Therapy in downtown Lexington, Illinois is here to help. They are a locally owned physical therapy company that can treat everyone from the star cheerleader to the farmer getting ready for harvest, to the professional office worker, to the grandmother who wants to be able to play with her grandchildren. The therapists at Ultra Physical Therapy have a combined 25 years of experience and are trained in cutting-edge interventions, including dry needling, blood flow restriction training, cupping, and the use of massage and joint manipulation. They are also skilled in developing exercise and rehabilitation programs to get you back to doing all the things that you love to do. So free yourself from those aches and pains that are slowing you down and give them a call at 309-365-2500 to schedule an appointment or just to ask questions.
Come to Ultra Physical Therapy in Lexington and we'll keep you moving.
When officially do they declare this riot over?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure when they decided that it was locked back up. I was still in the tower at that time.
And what kind of damage was done structurally?
Oh, they broke into the commissary. They broke the bars off the windows. They got all the commissary out. They burned the general store. They burned that up, and the leather shop and the laundry was set fire. And that's what the people on the outside of the prison could see, was just the smoke bellowing up from the cell houses.
And it really surprises me, and I don't know if it's still this way, just how much access they had to potentially hazardous, harmful, dangerous things. Apparently they had access to something that could light a fire. They had a baseball bat. They had the weights. Is that still what maximum security prisons are like? Do they still give these guys access?
Yes. And they work in the kitchen. They're issued knives. They work in the gym where they're issued boxing gloves and everything that you need for your sports. Everything's there. Weights to lift.
What do you think about? There's a lot of people that say, it's just inhumane how we treat our prisoners. We need to, some people say we need to let a lot of people in prison out, for the pettier crimes. The United States does have a lot of inmates. We have the most inmates per capita, most people in prison per capita. What do you think of that? And do you think that the amount of freedom that we give these guys who have done some of the worst crimes is maybe too much? Or do you think you need to give even those people that amount of freedom and recreation?
Actually, they got too much free time. They've got too much time on their hands. They can think of things. They can do things. And their biggest thing is weightlifting. They sit out there and build up like a weightlifter. A judge said they didn't have to work. The judge told them they were sentenced to prison, not to hard labor. Before, we had the farm. They worked on the farm. They got paid for working on the farm. They learned trades. They had a dental lab. They had a book bindery. They had a place where they canned vegetables. And they told them they didn't have to work. So now these people that were supporting themselves with a farm, they had livestock and everything else. Now the state's supporting them, where before they were supporting themselves.
And that's never a recipe for anything good, I don't think.
Too much free time.
Yeah.
So now if they don't have a high school education, they're mandated to get their diploma. They can go to college. They can do all the things that cost the taxpayers, but they don't do anything that helps themselves. Learning a trade, a dental trade. They made their own false teeth there. They had a dentist to come in and showed them how to do this stuff. They had a book bindery. They was repairing books for the high schools, for the grade schools. They got paid for that. They got 55 cents an hour. Big money for an inmate.
Mm-hmm.
Normally they get $15 a month.
Could they spend that at the general store and get some snacks if they wanted?
They have their own commissary. Yes, they can.
Okay. Is that what commissary means? I should know what that word means.
Yeah.
It's like just a snack area, concession stand.
Right. They
Got
can get food and stuff like that.
And not to go too far off track here, but I know there's been, I wish I could cite them, but some really famous psychology studies where they would take, they would take troubled boys or troubled young people and see what happens when they put them in a camp with a lot of, good people, good, upstanding young men and women. Mm-hmm. And what they find time and time again, because they were hoping that this group of, 100 great kids would rub off on this one or two or three negative or troubled kids. But what they find is that it's so much easier for a small amount of people to bring down the group of upstanding citizens, much easier than it is for even a bigger group of upstanding individuals to bring up a group of troubled individuals. It's easier to fall than it is to build up, obviously. And it's like maybe you don't want to give 500 troubled individuals who have done a lot of terrible things and maybe are relatively stuck in their ways, because they are older and they've done this many times and they found themselves here. Maybe you don't want to give them ample time to intermingle and communicate and, be with each other and talk and discuss and plan. It's at least food for thought, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, yes. And with the modern prisons, the biggest problem is gang activity. That there's gangs in the prison just like in the street. And you either join the gang or they beat you up or they steal everything you got. You joined the gangs for protection. Well, now you belong to one gang, another gang wants what you got, so now we got this clash. So they steal from one gang, the other gang steals back, and it's a college for misconduct. They're learning their trade on how to do it without getting caught. So when they get back on the street, they can professionally be an outlaw.
And I mean, you saw this stuff for years and years. You know what it's like on the inside of these prison walls. What's maybe one thing that you would like to see changed?
I would like to see them be able to work so they could learn a trade. When they get out, they don't have to come back because they can't get a job. The other thing is there should be programs when they get out that they can get a job. You take a guy and you dump him on the street with $15 in his pocket. If you get hungry, you're going to steal a loaf of bread. And they don't have any support out there.
So maybe teach them some skills during their time behind bars. Teach them skills that they can apply to the workforce.
Absolutely.
And then set something up so that they can have a job ready for them when they leave. And then they have a job. Then they're making money. Then they have purpose. And they can do things.
Then they don't have to come back.
Right, yeah, and they're also working hard, and there's something about working hard that makes you feel meaningful. You see the fruits of your labor. I agree with you wholeheartedly. I totally agree with you.
Yeah, and when they were working, they were contributing to the inmate population. They was doing things for themselves. They were getting the benefit. But one time I brought a wagon, this is just one time, I brought a wagon load of tomatoes that we had picked on the farm. In 5-gallon buckets, there was probably 20 buckets full on a hay rack that I took into the dining room. I told them I'd come back and get the wagon in about 4 hours so they'd have time to unload it. I came back in 4 hours. The tomatoes were still sitting on the wagon, and I went into the dining room and talked to the cook. And I says, you got people over there that are opening them number 10 cans of stewed tomatoes, and I got fresh tomatoes out here. What's the deal? He says, yeah, they don't want to wash them, so they're opening cans. Somebody's not teaching somebody right.
Interesting.
Why would they do that?
Why? What do you think?
That the inmates ran it.
Well,
they did what they wanted to do, not what the guard wanted them to do, or the cook, whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. That's interesting. Well, okay, so the riots end. They successfully get everyone behind bars. What's the general feel of the prison? I mean, it's a 24-hour place. I don't know what time you went home that day, but what was going home like? We'll start there, and then I'll ask what the next day was like.
Well, after everything settled down and everybody was locked back up, then we had to treat the injured. And I for one, had to take inmates to the hospital to get them treated for small injuries they got either through the guards not obeying the guards or for other inmates beating them up because there was chaos on there. So we did that. I guess I got home about 9 o'clock that night. All I wanted to do was take a shower and go to bed.
Were you married at the time?
Yes, I was. My wife was out of town, though. She had been visiting relatives.
I see.
Which was good. She didn't have to worry about me. She didn't know about it.
Right. Well, man. Okay, so what's the next day like?
We went in. Like I said, they'd burned up all the food. So we got some food from the white women's prison. All they got for breakfast was a box of milk and a box of cereal because everything else was gone. Everything was gone. Then they started shipping food in to them from other institutions so we could feed them. They even brought a reefer truck in because the storage was all gone. It was burned down. They eventually rebuilt that, but they built it different the second time.
You mentioned at least one worker, that 18-year-old girl, didn't show up for work the next day. She never came back.
Never came back.
Did anyone else never come back?
About half the guard force. A lot of them quit.
How many do you think there were before they quit, and how many after?
Head count, I couldn't tell you. I'd say a good quarter of the guards walked off, said they weren't coming back.
Was that scary to have
It just put to work because they're all locked up. That put the work on the guards that was there because we had to feed them. You know, just because they were bad, we still had to feed them. So we had to carry the food to their cells and feed them. So it was a lot of work, a lot of extra work.
Did you guys get raises, the ones that remained?
Fairbury Furniture is Central Illinois' premier furniture store. This family-owned business offers a vast selection of premium furniture items from all of your favorite brands, including Sealy, Best Home Furnishings, Leather Italia, Tempur-Pedic, and Ashley, just to name a few. And right next door to their gorgeous 7,000 square foot furniture showroom, you will find the Fairbury Furniture Mattress Store, home to all of the latest and greatest mattresses in any and all sizes. Also inside Fairbury Furniture is the popular WC Market, a beloved shop that offers an ever-changing selection of unique gifts and fashionable home decor. Here at Fairbury Furniture, the staff is always helpful and friendly, and they are well stocked with all the mattresses, tables, chairs, recliners, couches, and decorative pillows that your heart desires. So make your home interior beautiful, comfortable, stylish, and delightful when you shop at Fairbury's own Fairbury Furniture.
Come on down to Fairbury Furniture, where the furniture rocks.
Eventually we got to put up step raises where it was a little more money than we were making before. Actually, it was quite a bit more.
Now, why did you come back? Why didn't you not come back?
I don't know. I really don't know. It was a job, and it was my job to do, and that's what I did.
Would you describe the event as traumatic? And I know you were in your tower, and you weren't right up front and close to the action. You didn't necessarily see any of your guard friends get murdered.
Right.
But was it a traumatic experience for you?
It was in a way. There's actually two people in that tower. And the other person was an older man, and I told him I pulled my stool up to the port, and I says, I'll shoot this round of gas if they come through that door, and then I'm going to start shooting into them, hoping they'll think it's a bad place to be. He says, you can't do that. She says, you can't do that. And his face started turning red, and he started pacing back and forth. And I says, I don't care if I can do it or not. I'll explain it later to a judge. But these guys under this tower are expecting me to keep them inmates off of them. And all I got to do it with is to shoot into that crowd and keep them out of here. He says, you can't do that. I says, well, I'm going to do it. So he didn't participate. He just passed back and forth. Just, woe is me, woe is me, woe is me. Mm-hmm. I was very, very calm in my mind. I knew what I was going to do. If I mess up and get myself hurt, that's one thing. But if I mess up and get them people who was dependent on me to keep them inmates off of them around my tower, that's a whole different ballgame.
Do you think your ability to remain calm amidst that looming threat and looming, death that could have happened if they would have came through, do you credit that to your military upbringing where they teach you that?
It could have had something to do with it. I have often wondered what would I do in a situation like that, but it was very clear to me at the time. Mm-hmm. It was very clear, and it was really an eye-opener to me.
What changed at the prison then after all this? Did they make some strict, changes to how they were going to do things?
I don't think they changed at all. They changed later on when there was an inmate shot, was trying to stab another inmate years later, and then they had the Charles Speck. You remember Charles Speck that killed the nurses in Chicago? He killed 7 nurses in a dorm, and there was one hid under the bed, and she testified. Well, he was there, and he was in Statesville, and he was a homosexual. He said if he'd known prison was like that, he'd have been there a long time ago. Well,
what's he mean by that? Did I understand
he liked
that correct?
it. Huh. He liked it. He was a homosexual.
Oh, okay.
And he liked prison. And so when he had a friend of his, well, he was actually taking hormones and growing breasts. He had a friend that taped him using drugs, using cocaine, sniffing cocaine, and it was on a tape with his jugs hanging out. That got to the newspapers. That opened the politicians' eyes. That's when things started changing. Charles Speck will never know how much good he did for the guards in the correctional system. He'll never know. And he's dead now, but he'll never know how much good he did for the prison system.
Very interesting that's what made the changes that you most wanted to see.
Yep. The politicians, their eyes were closed to it until that, and then, whoa, this is really going on? And yeah, it's really going on. We've been telling you forever.
Now, you mentioned that you had to take some inmates to the hospital, inmates that were even right in on the action, maybe even inmates, I assume, that maybe killed guards or at least contributed to the murder of guards.
Could have.
Did you feel weird? Did people feel odd about caring for in taking
we were
these?
Mad.
What was that?
We were mad.
Right, that you had to help the people that killed your friends?
Yes. We were all mad. We did our jobs, but we didn't like it. And we felt very good about feeding them one box of milk and one cereal box for breakfast. We felt very good about that.
And now people probably can put 2 and 2 together and make some assumptions here, and you're retired now, so maybe you can answer a little more freely, but these inmates, you have to continue to interact with them. You have to feed them. I know there were temptations to do this, but maybe did this happen? Did you treat them a little harshly after that? Maybe when it came time to bring the food to them, did you throw it through the cell bars, or was there any maltreatment or mistreatment?
Very little. I did see some things. The biggest problem was there was no food slot in the bars. There was no food slots. So when we put their food on the plate, we had to fold the plate over and stick it through the bars. So everything got mixed up.
Oh, paper plates. I see.
Yeah. And, of course, we wore a lot of it because of that. But we had no choice. There was no other way to put it in a cell. They were locked up, and they were staying locked up till after the investigation was over.
And you mean you wore a lot of that, like they threw it back at you?
Yes, they did. We wore a lot of it. And it seemed like they always got something really messy, like goulash or
It's never an
chili
apple.
mac,
Yeah.
and, the good stuff.
Wow. Man, I hear that, and it makes me grimace because you must have had a lot of patience, I guess, to not lose your cool. Or maybe, did you ever lose your cool?
No. Some did. Some would throw it back. We didn't see nothing.
Right. Was there anything else that you didn't see?
No, not nothing that hurt anybody. No. We did see a few inmates that try to reach through and get more, and they may get their knuckles smacked with a spoon or something like that. But
Wow.
actually, it was very professional, if you ask me. The guards were very professional. The ones that stayed.
Now, I mean, I really appreciate you telling me that whole story. It's really incredible. These days, I mean, what's the guard industry like right now? Is there a shortage of people that want to work in prisons? Are they maybe not paid what they should be paid, do you think? You've been removed from the field for quite a while now, so maybe you have some clear insight.
Actually, their pay has come a long way because of the unions. When I started working there, I was getting like $250 a month. And after the riot, it went up to like $1,500. Well, that's in 77, 78. So it went up overnight that much, and then we started negotiating for more money. And that right now, it's probably one of the better jobs in Pontiac right now.
Man, what do you think they're getting right now?
I don't have a clue.
Wow.
It's a living wage now anyway. Before it wasn't.
Yeah, it better be a living wage. They're putting their lives on the line. So, man, I've talked to a few guards at the gym at Pontiac Prison. They're like, man, it's tough. They say it is sure tough to do this. And they're these bodybuilder-looking guys, too.
Yeah. Well, they're starting to open it back up. For a long time, it was just for people who couldn't make it in the other prisons. So they bring them to Pontiac because they were locked up all the time. But then my phone keeps ringing. I'm wondering what.
Okay, well, hey, we can go ahead and wrap this
No,
up.
I don't care.
Okay. Well, I can't hear it, so no biggie there. But so, I mean, let's pay a little memory to these people. How many people died that day? If you can remember the names, you can say them.
Yes, I remember the names. Bob Conkle, Stanley Cole, and Bill Thomas.
Man, these were local guys.
Yes, they were.
I'm sure a lot of people watching this will know those names. And
Stanley Cole, I hired in with. I worked for Bill Thompson. Thomas. I worked with him. Bill Conkle was kind of new. He hadn't been there too long.
Man, was he a young guy?
Yes, he was. Very young. I doubt if he was 22 years old.
Were these guys your friends then?
They were. And Conkle had two brothers that worked there also.
Oh, man. Wow.
Yeah.
That's really tragic, and what an event. And I mean, Tom Bailey, thank you so much for giving me the insight that you have on this whole day. You were right there. You were right in the action. Incredible recollection of it, and I think it's really educational for everyone listening. And not only that, but you provided a lot of brilliant opinions from someone who's been in the field, when we were talking about what needs to change in the prison system maybe, and et cetera, et cetera. But I really appreciate your time, and if there's anything else you'd like to say before we wrap this thing up, please feel free.
One thing I'd like to say is it could have been a lot worse. If the West House had not stopped eating, they would have been in the dining room when the North House came back from the yard. They would have been out. The chapel had the South House in it. It could have got back in the South House, and it didn't happen. Because normally the West House stays in the dining room until the North House gets back in their house, and then they take the West House back. This day, the West House didn't eat, so they took them back first. Otherwise, they would have been in the dining room. It would have been a lot different outcome.
Absolutely. Someone must have been saying their prayers that day.
Yes,
My goodness.
It could have been a lot worse. Yeah.
Right. Well, again, Tom, thank you so much for your time today. This was really marvelous, and I think people are really going to appreciate your telling of this story. And I just can't thank you enough for agreeing to come on. It took some persuading, but I sure appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, everyone, that is a wrap. Be sure to subscribe and like the Paul Garcia Show and share this video if you found it educational, entertaining, or enlightening. God bless, and have a great rest of your week.